There are moments in life when we're faced with choices that test the very core of our values. Imagine being in love, deeply, sincerely, with someone who seems perfect in every way. Now imagine uncovering a secret about their family, one so devastating, so morally shocking, that it threatens to tear apart the very fabric of your relationship. This is the story of Davin, a man of immense wealth and even greater humility, who dared to test the authenticity of his fiancée's family by hiding his true identity. What he discovered wasn't just about them, it was a revelation about himself, his beliefs, and the power of standing up for what's right. Today, we'll journey through this tale of love, deception, and courage. It's a story that reminds us that true greatness isn't in the riches we possess, but in the values we uphold. If you believe in the power of love to overcome even the darkest of truths, type in the comments below. Love and integrity guide my life. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire, teach, and touch the heart. Now let me tell you a story that might just change the way you see the world. Davin had always been a man of principle. Unlike many who found themselves in the lap of luxury, he hadn't let wealth define him. From a young age, his parents instilled in him the belief that money was a tool, not an identity. Though the family business grew into a global empire, Davin remained humble, shunning the glitz and glamour that often came with his status. His core values were rooted in compassion, empathy, and honesty. But even for a man as grounded as Davin, love had a way of testing everything he thought he knew about himself and the world around him. When Davin met Veronica, he felt an instant connection. She was brilliant, kind, and seemed genuinely uninterested in his financial status. This was a rarity in his world, where people often valued him for what he could offer rather than who he truly was. Their courtship was simple but meaningful, and Davin quickly realized he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. But before taking that monumental step, there was one thing left to do: meet her family. Veronica came from a family that prided itself on sophistication and tradition. She often spoke of her parents' high expectations and their insistence on maintaining a certain image within their social circle. Although Davin respected her family's values, he couldn't shake a nagging thought. How would they react to him if they didn't know he was wealthy? This question became more than a passing curiosity. It was a test, one that Davin felt compelled to take. He decided to conceal his identity and present himself as an ordinary man. His logic was simple. True character reveals itself in the absence of wealth and status. If Veronica's family could accept him as a modest photographer with big dreams but limited means, their love and approval would feel genuine. The plan took shape quickly. Davin swapped his tailored suits for simple jeans and a worn leather jacket. He borrowed an old car from a friend, leaving his luxury vehicle safely tucked away. Even his watch, a signature piece from an exclusive collection, was replaced with an understated one he'd bought online. As he looked in the mirror, he hardly recognized himself. This wasn't Davin the billionaire. This was Davin the dreamer, and he was ready to meet Veronica's family. The day of the meeting arrived, and Davin found himself driving through a picturesque neighborhood with sprawling estates and perfectly manicured lawns. Veronica's family home stood out, not because of its size or grandeur, but because of its sheer presence. The wrought iron gates opened slowly, revealing a winding driveway lined with towering oak trees. Davin couldn't help but feel a pang of nervousness. Veronica greeted him warmly at the door, her smile as radiant as ever. "You'll do great," she whispered, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. But as he stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. Her parents, Richard and Margaret, were the epitome of refinement. Richard, with his salt and pepper hair and tailored suit, exuded authority. Margaret, poised and elegant in a designer dress, carried an air of quiet judgment. They greeted Davin politely, but their expressions betrayed a flicker of surprise and perhaps disappointment. "It's a pleasure to meet you, sir," Davin said, extending his hand to Richard. Richard shook his hand firmly, his gaze sharp. "Likewise, Veronica's spoken highly of you." Margaret chimed in, her smile more practiced than genuine. "Yes, we've been looking forward to this. So Davin, tell us about yourself. "What do you do?" "I'm a freelance photographer," Davin replied smoothly. "I specialize in capturing moments that tell a story, portraits, events, that sort of thing." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Freelance? That must be challenging." "It has its ups and downs," Davin admitted. "But I love what I do. It's fulfilling in ways that money can't measure." Margaret exchanged a glance with Richard, her expression unreadable. "How interesting," she said lightly. "Veronica mentioned you're quite talented." Throughout the conversation, Davin remained calm and composed. He answered their questions honestly, never embellishing his story or wavering in his narrative. But beneath the surface, he could feel the weight of their judgment. Every comment, every glance, seemed to carry an unspoken critique. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have been plucked from the pages of an interior design magazine. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the table, which was set with fine china and silverware polished to perfection. The meal itself was exquisite, but it was the main course that caught Davin's attention. "This is delicious," he said, taking a bite of the tender meat. "What is it?" Richard smiled faintly. "Just something special we enjoy on occasion. It's an acquired taste," Margaret quickly added. "A delicacy." Davin nodded, though he couldn't quite place the flavor. There was something unusual about it, something that didn't sit well with him. But before he could dwell on it, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, and the evening carried on. Later that night, as Davin excused himself to use the restroom, he passed by Richard's study. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, he heard hushed voices. "Our supplier assured me it's authentic," Richard was saying. "We can't afford any mistakes. The clients expect the best." "Relax," Margaret replied. "This supplier is reliable. We've worked with them before." Davin's heart raced. The words supplier and clients took on a chilling significance. Could it be related to the unusual meat served at dinner? His mind jumped to the stories he'd heard about illegal wildlife trade, where rare and endangered animals were smuggled for consumption or profit. As he left the house that evening, Davin couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Veronica's parents weren't just wealthy, they were hiding something that went against everything he believed in. But confronting them would mean risking his relationship with Veronica. Was he ready for that? Or would the truth, once uncovered, force him to make an impossible choice? In the next chapter, we'll follow Davin as he begins his secret investigation, piecing together the unsettling puzzle of Veronica's family. What he uncovers will shake him to his core and leave him questioning everything. Stay with us for this gripping tale of love, betrayal, and the courage to do what's right. The drive home was a long one, not in distance but in the weight of Davin's thoughts. The evening at Veronica's family home had left him unsettled, and he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in his chest. The conversation he overheard between Richard and Margaret replayed in his mind like a haunting refrain. Words like supplier, clients, and authentic carried implications he couldn't dismiss. Davin had always trusted his instincts, and now they were telling him that something was amiss. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the unusual flavor of the meat at dinner, coupled with the cryptic conversation, pointed to a disturbing possibility. Veronica's parents might be involved in something illegal, perhaps even something as reprehensible as wildlife trafficking. That night, Davin lay awake in his modest apartment, staring at the ceiling. His mind swirled with questions. How could people who seemed so poised and cultured be tied to something so immoral? Could Veronica know? And if she didn't, what would happen if she found out? By morning, Davin had resolved to uncover the truth. It wasn't a decision he made lightly. Confronting the family outright could jeopardize his relationship with Veronica, and there was always the chance he was wrong. But if he was right, staying silent would make him complicit. His conscience wouldn't allow that. The first step in his investigation was to dig deeper into the family's background. Davin wasn't just a photographer. He was a meticulous planner with an analytical mind. These qualities had served him well in both his personal and professional life. Now they would be his tools for uncovering the truth. He started by researching the businesses Richard and Margaret were involved in. On the surface, their ventures seemed legitimate investment portfolios, real estate holdings, and charitable foundations. But as Davin delved deeper, he noticed something unusual. Several of their recent investments were tied to offshore accounts in shell companies, entities often used to obscure questionable activities. One company in particular caught his attention, a logistics firm specializing in exotic goods. The vague description raised a red flag, especially given the context of the dinner conversation. Davin decided to investigate further. Using his network of contacts, he reached out to an old friend, Ethan, who worked in cybersecurity. Ethan owed Davin a favor, and while he couldn't legally access the company's records, he could help Davin navigate public databases and piece together a clearer picture. "Davin," Ethan said during their call, "this company you're looking into, it's clean on paper, but there are anomalies. For one, it's registered in a jurisdiction known for lax oversight. And two, its shipping routes overlap with areas notorious for smuggling." Davin's suspicions deepened. "Can you track any shipments tied to them? Anything unusual in their cargo?" "I can try," Ethan replied. "Give me a day or two." While Ethan worked on his end, Davin decided to gather more evidence on his own. He remembered the distinct taste of the meat served at dinner, which lingered in his memory as both unfamiliar and unsettling. If he could identify it, he might uncover a clue. He visited a local gourmet market and described the flavor to a butcher, omitting the context. The butcher, a seasoned expert, suggested it might be venison but added, "If it didn't taste like regular deer meat, it could be something exotic. You'd be surprised what some people eat these days, legally or not." The comment struck a chord. Davin left the market with a sinking feeling in his chest. He knew there were underground markets for exotic meats, often sourced through illegal poaching and wildlife trafficking. These practices not only endangered species, but also fueled a network of corruption and cruelty. 2 days later, Ethan called back with an update. "I found something," he said. "There's a shipment scheduled to arrive at the company's warehouse next week. The manifest lists it as perishable goods, but the weight and volume don't match standard food shipments. It's a red flag." Davin's pulse quickened. "Do you have the warehouse address?" Ethan hesitated. "Davin, are you sure you want to get involved in this? If these people are connected to something shady, it could be dangerous." "I appreciate the concern, Ethan, but I need to know the truth," Davin replied firmly. "Can you send me the address?" Reluctantly, Ethan agreed, and within minutes, Davin had the information he needed. The warehouse was located in an industrial district on the outskirts of the city. Davin decided to stake it out, choosing a day when he knew a shipment was due. He parked his borrowed car in a discreet location and waited, his camera ready. Hours passed, but his patience paid off when a truck arrived, its cargo concealed under heavy tarps. Using the zoom lens on his camera, Davin captured images of the truck and the workers unloading it. He noted the logo on the truck matched the logistics company tied to Richard and Margaret. While he couldn't see the contents of the crates being moved, the secrecy surrounding the operation was telling. As Davin drove home, he felt a mix of anger and determination. He didn't want to believe that Veronica's parents were involved in something as heinous as wildlife trafficking. But the evidence was mounting. He needed to be sure before confronting anyone, and that meant digging deeper. The following week, Davin expanded his investigation. He contacted a wildlife conservation group he had supported in the past, explaining the situation without revealing names. They confirmed his worst fears. The logistics company he was investigating had been flagged in connection with illegal wildlife trade, but lacked sufficient evidence to prosecute. "This kind of operation is incredibly well hidden," the conservationist explained. "They use shell companies, falsified documents, and bribes to cover their tracks. If you have evidence, even circumstantial, we'd be interested in seeing it." Davin shared the photos he had taken, and while they weren't definitive proof, they added weight to the suspicions surrounding the company. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, Davin faced a moral dilemma. Should he confront Veronica with what he had discovered? Would she even believe him? And if she did, how would she react to the possibility that her parents were involved in something so despicable? For now, he decided to wait. He needed more evidence, something undeniable that would force the truth into the open. But time was running out, and Davin knew that the deeper he dug, the more dangerous the situation could become. Davin's investigation is about to take a risky turn as he inches closer to uncovering the full scope of the operation. But what happens when the truth threatens not only his relationship, but his safety? Don't miss the next chapter, where secrets unravel and tensions escalate. The days that followed were some of the most intense of Davin's life. His investigation into Veronica's parents had uncovered enough circumstantial evidence to confirm his worst fears. But he still lacked the definitive proof needed to expose their involvement in illegal wildlife trafficking. Davin wrestled with the moral weight of the situation. His love for Veronica was genuine, but so was his commitment to standing up for what was right. If he acted too hastily, he risked alienating Veronica and possibly ruining their relationship forever. If he delayed, however, he would be complicit in allowing a criminal operation to continue unchecked. The stakes were higher than ever, and Davin knew he had to tread carefully. One evening, as he sat at his desk reviewing the photos he had taken of the warehouse operation, a thought struck him. The logistics company was the key, but it wasn't enough to prove Richard and Margaret's direct involvement. He needed a smoking gun, something that connected Veronica's parents to the illegal activities beyond a shadow of a doubt. Davin decided to infiltrate the warehouse himself. It was a dangerous plan, but he felt he had no choice. Equipped with a discreet camera, a flashlight, and gloves, he planned his approach meticulously. The warehouse's remote location worked in his favor, as there would likely be minimal security during the late-night hours. The night of the operation was eerily quiet. Davin parked his car a few blocks away and approached the warehouse on foot. His heart pounded as he slipped through a gap in the perimeter fence. The building loomed before him, its windows dark and uninviting. He found an unlocked side door and entered cautiously, his flashlight casting a narrow beam of light across the cavernous interior. Rows of stacked crates filled the space, each marked with codes and labels that hinted at their contents. Davin began inspecting the labels, photographing anything that looked suspicious. He noticed several crates marked as perishables, but the descriptions were vague, listing only generic terms like organic goods or natural produce. As he opened one of the crates, the truth hit him like a tidal wave. Inside, carefully wrapped in ice packs, were animal parts, skins, bones, and even preserved organs. Some were labeled with species names he recognized as endangered. Davin's stomach churned as he realized the full scope of the operation. This wasn't just smuggling. It was the desecration of life itself, driven by greed and disregard for the natural world. He continued his search, documenting everything he found. One crate contained live animals, small, terrified creatures crammed into tiny cages. The sight broke Davin's heart, but he knew he couldn't help them without jeopardizing his mission. He whispered a silent promise to himself. He would expose this operation and ensure justice was served. As he moved deeper into the warehouse, Davin stumbled upon a locked office. The door was heavy and reinforced, suggesting it housed something valuable or incriminating. Using a tool from his pocket, he managed to pick the lock. Inside, he found a desk cluttered with documents, ledgers, and a laptop. The ledgers were meticulous, detailing transactions that linked the logistics company to exotic suppliers and wealthy clients around the world. What shocked Davin most, however, were the names listed under key stakeholders. Among them were Richard and Margaret. Their involvement wasn't just passive. They were actively managing and profiting from the operation. Davin photographed every page, ensuring he captured the evidence he needed. His hands trembled as he worked, a mix of anger and disbelief coursing through him. How could Veronica's parents, who seemed so polished and respectable, be capable of something so heinous? As he turned his attention to the laptop, Davin hesitated. Accessing its contents would be risky, but it might hold the final piece of evidence he needed. Using a portable drive, he cloned the hard drive and left everything as he had found it. The process took precious minutes, during which Davin's senses were on high alert. Just as he finished, the sound of a distant door opening sent a jolt of panic through him. Someone was entering the warehouse. Davin quickly shut off his flashlight and crouched behind a stack of crates. His breath came in shallow gasps as he listened to the approaching footsteps. Two voices echoed through the warehouse, one male. The other female. Shipment arrived yesterday, the man said. Everything's accounted for. Good, the woman replied. We can't afford delays. The clients are already asking about the next batch. Davin recognized the voices immediately. It was Richard and Margaret. His blood ran cold as he realized the extent of their involvement. They weren't just financiers or distant overseers. They were actively managing the trafficking operation. As the voices grew closer, Davin tightened his grip on the camera. He couldn't risk being discovered, but he also couldn't let them leave without capturing more evidence. Slowly, he positioned himself to snap a photo of the couple as they examined the crates. The flash of the camera was faint, but it was enough to catch Richard's attention. Did you see that? He asked sharply, turning toward the crates. Margaret frowned. See what? A light over there. Davin's heart raced as he realized he had been spotted. He quickly moved toward the exit, staying low to avoid detection. Richard's footsteps grew louder as he followed the source of the flash. Who's there? Richard demanded, his voice echoing through the warehouse. Davin reached the side door just as Richard's flashlight swept over the area. He slipped through the gap in the fence and sprinted toward his car, adrenaline propelling him forward. As he drove away, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He had the evidence he needed, but he had also narrowly escaped being caught. Back at his apartment, Davin reviewed the photos and documents he had obtained. The evidence was damning, leaving no doubt about Richard and Margaret's guilt. But as he prepared to take the next steps, a wave of sorrow washed over him. How would Veronica react to this revelation? Would she stand by her parents, or would she join him in exposing their crimes? Davin knew the time for secrecy was over. He had to confront Veronica with the truth, no matter the consequences. As Davin prepares to reveal his findings to Veronica, tensions rise and emotions run high. In the next chapter, we'll witness an emotional confrontation that will test their love and loyalty like never before. Will Veronica stand by Davin, or will the truth tear them apart? Davin spent the entire night reviewing the evidence he had gathered. Every photo, document, and ledger pointed to one undeniable truth. Veronica's parents were deeply involved in an illegal wildlife trafficking operation. The weight of his discovery pressed heavily on him, not just because of the moral implications, but because of what it would mean for his relationship with Veronica. He couldn't avoid the confrontation any longer. Veronica deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. But how would she react? Would she believe him? Or would her loyalty to her family blind her to the evidence? The questions tormented him as the sun rose, casting light on what promised to be one of the most difficult days of his life. Davin texted Veronica, asking if they could meet at a nearby park. The public setting, he hoped, would offer some level of emotional balance. She agreed, unaware of the storm that was about to descend on her life. When Veronica arrived, she was her usual radiant self, greeting Davin with a warm smile and a kiss. But she quickly sensed his unease. "You look like you haven't slept," she said, concern flickering in her eyes. "Is everything okay?" Davin took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Veronica, there's something we need to talk about. It's serious." Her expression shifted to one of worry. "You're scaring me." "Davin, what's going on?" He gestured for her to sit on a nearby bench, and they settled under the shade of a large oak tree. Davin began cautiously, recounting the events of the past weeks, his suspicions about her parents, the conversation he overheard, and the research he had conducted. Veronica listened in silence, her face a mixture of disbelief and confusion. "Veronica," Davin said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to be wrong. But the evidence is overwhelming. Your parents are involved in something illegal, something terrible." Her eyes narrowed and she shook her head. "Davin, this is insane. My parents aren't criminals. They've worked hard their whole lives. What you're saying doesn't make sense." "I understand how hard this is to hear," he said gently, "but I need you to see what I found." He pulled out his phone and showed her the photos he had taken at the warehouse, along with the documents from the locked office. Veronica's hands trembled as she scrolled through the images. The sight of the live animals in cages, the labeled crates, and her parents' names in the ledgers seemed to drain the color from her face. This can't be real." she whispered, her voice barely audible. There has to be some mistake. I wish there was, Davin said, his tone filled with sorrow. But it's all real, Veronica. I've seen it with my own eyes. Your parents are deeply involved in this operation. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stared at the evidence, her mind racing to reconcile the loving parents she had always known with the criminals Davin described. Why would they do this? She asked, her voice breaking. Why would they hurt innocent animals? It doesn't make sense. I don't know, Davin admitted. But what I do know is that we can't let this continue. We have to do something. Veronica looked up at him, her face a mask of anguish. Do something? What does that even mean? Are you suggesting we turn them in? Davin hesitated. Veronica, I love you. I wouldn't ask this of you if there were any other way. But this operation is bigger than your parents. It's destroying lives, both human and animal. If we stay silent, we're complicit. She stood abruptly, pacing back and forth. You don't understand. They're my parents, Davin. They raised me, supported me, loved me. How can I betray them like this? I do understand, he said, standing as well. And I know how much you love them. But love doesn't mean turning a blind eye to what's wrong. If we don't act, more lives will be lost. Is that what you want? Veronica's tears spilled over as she buried her face in her hands. For what felt like an eternity, she stood there, grappling with the weight of the decision before her. Finally, she looked up at Davin, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and resolve. What do we do? She asked, her voice trembling. Davin felt a wave of relief wash over him, though it was tempered by the gravity of the situation. We need to take this evidence to the authorities, he said. They'll know how to handle it. But what about my parents? Veronica asked, her voice small. What will happen to them? I don't know, Davin admitted. But they need to be held accountable for their actions. This isn't just about them, it's about stopping something much bigger. Veronica nodded slowly, her hands clenched into fists. If we do this, it's going to destroy my family. My parents will hate me. My relatives will disown me. Are you prepared for that? I'm prepared for whatever comes, as long as we do the right thing, Davin said. I'll stand by you, no matter what. Veronica took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. Then let's do it. Together, they gathered all the evidence and prepared to contact the authorities. The process was harrowing, filled with moments of doubt and fear. Veronica insisted on being present for the meeting, determined to face the truth head-on. When the authorities reviewed the evidence, they were stunned by the scope of the operation. The logistics company was linked to a vast network of illegal activities, and Richard and Margaret were identified as key figures. Arrest warrants were issued, and within days, the operation was exposed. The fallout was devastating. Veronica's parents were arrested, and their involvement in the smuggling ring became public knowledge. The family name, once associated with prestige and respectability, was now synonymous with scandal and disgrace. Veronica's world was shattered, but she found solace in Davin's unwavering support. Their relationship, tested by the weight of the truth, grew stronger in the aftermath. Together, they vowed to use their experience to make a difference, working with conservation groups to raise awareness about the horrors of wildlife trafficking. As Davin and Veronica grapple with the aftermath of exposing her parents, they find themselves facing new challenges. In the next chapter, we'll explore the consequences of their decision and the unexpected obstacles that threaten to tear them apart once more. Stay tuned for the next gripping installment. The morning after the arrest, Veronica awoke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. Texts, missed calls, and emails flooded her screen, each one carrying a wave of judgment, confusion, or anger. News of her parents' arrest had spread quickly, dominating headlines and social media feeds. The pristine reputation of her family was now in tatters, and she was at the center of the storm. Davin sat beside her on the couch, his hand resting gently on hers. You don't have to face this alone, he said softly. She managed a weak smile, though her eyes were red and swollen from hours of crying. I know, she replied, but it feels like the whole world is against me. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Former friends distanced themselves, claiming ignorance of her parents' actions, but subtly implying that Veronica should have known. Relatives accused her of betrayal, calling her selfish for turning against her family. Even strangers online took to commenting on her supposed lack of loyalty, their words cutting deeper than she cared to admit. For Davin, watching Veronica endure this was agonizing. He knew they had done the right thing, but the weight of their decision was heavier than he had anticipated. It wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about navigating the wreckage left in its wake. "I can't believe how quickly people have turned on me," Veronica said, her voice trembling. "All my life, I've tried to do the right thing, to be a good person. And now, it's like none of that matters." "It matters," Davin said firmly. "The people who truly care about you will see that. And the ones who don't, they were never worth your time." Veronica nodded, but the words offered little comfort. She had lost so much in such a short time: her parents, her extended family, her social circle. The life she had known was gone, replaced by a harsh new reality. In the weeks that followed, Veronica and Davin focused on rebuilding their lives. Veronica, determined to channel her pain into something meaningful, began working with wildlife conservation groups. She wanted to undo some of the damage her parents had caused, even if it could never fully be repaired. Davin, who had always been passionate about environmental causes, joined her in this effort. Together, they organized fundraisers, spoke at events, and used their platform to raise awareness about the horrors of wildlife trafficking. Their work brought them closer, but it also highlighted the depth of the challenges they faced. The trafficking operation they had exposed was just one piece of a much larger network, and dismantling it would take years of effort. Veronica struggled with feelings of guilt, wondering if her parents' choices had irreparably harmed the world she was now fighting to protect. "It's not your fault," Davin told her one evening as they prepared for a fundraising gala. "What matters is what you're doing now. You're making a difference. And that's more than most people can say." Veronica nodded, but the guilt lingered. As their work gained momentum, Veronica and Davin began receiving troubling messages. At first, they were vague anonymous emails warning them to stay out of things that don't concern you. But as time went on, the threats became more specific. One night, Davin found a note taped to his car windshield. It read, "You've made powerful enemies. Stop before it's too late." He brought the note to Veronica, his jaw clenched with anger. "This isn't just about us anymore," he said. "Whoever's behind this operation wants us silenced." Veronica's face paled as she read the note. "Do you think it's the same people my parents were working with?" "Most likely," Davin replied. "Exposing your parents disrupted their business, and now they see us as a threat." The realization was chilling. The operation they had exposed was larger and more dangerous than they had anticipated, and its leaders weren't willing to let two individuals derail their plans. Davin insisted on contacting law enforcement, and the authorities took the threats seriously. They provided temporary security for high-profile events and advised Davin and Veronica to remain vigilant. But the threats didn't stop. Their phones were hacked, their emails intercepted, and their every move seemed to be under surveillance. The constant pressure began to take a toll on their relationship. As the weeks turned into months, the stress of their situation began to wear on Davin and Veronica. They argued more frequently, often about whether they should continue their work or step back for their own safety. "You think I don't care about us?" Veronica snapped during one heated exchange. "I'm doing this because I want to make things right. I thought you understood that." "I do," Davin replied, his voice rising. "But making things right doesn't mean sacrificing ourselves in the process. If something happens to you, I'll never forgive myself." The argument ended in silence, both of them retreating to separate corners of the apartment. Later that night, Davin found Veronica sitting on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. He sat beside her, the tension between them still palpable. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I'm just scared. I don't want to lose you." Veronica turned to him, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared too. But if we give up now, what was it all for?" Davin nodded, pulling her into an embrace. "We'll figure it out, together." Despite the challenges, there were moments of hope that kept them going. The conservation groups they worked with reported an increase in public awareness and support for anti-trafficking efforts. More individuals came forward with tips and information, leading to additional arrests within the network. One day, they received a letter from a young woman who had attended one of their events. She wrote about how their story had inspired her to pursue a career in environmental law, dedicating her life to fighting wildlife crimes. "That's why we can't give up," Veronica said, holding the letter tightly. "People are listening. We're making a difference." Davin smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You're right. We've come this far. We can't stop now." But just as they began to feel a sense of progress, a chilling encounter reminded them of the dangers they still faced. One evening, as they returned home from an event, Davin noticed a car following them. He took a series of sharp turns, hoping to lose the tail, but the car stayed close. Panic set in as he realized they were being deliberately pursued. "Call the police," he told Veronica, his voice steady despite the fear gripping him. As Veronica dialed, the car suddenly sped up and swerved in front of them, forcing Davin to slam on the brakes. Two men stepped out, their faces obscured by masks. Before they could approach, the sound of sirens pierced the night air. The police arrived just in time, scaring off the attackers. Davin and Veronica were shaken, but unharmed, their resolve only strengthened by the encounter. "This isn't going to stop us," Davin said as they spoke with the officers. "If anything, it's proof that what we're doing matters." The attack on Davin and Veronica was a stark reminder of the dangerous forces they had provoked. Despite the fear that lingered in their hearts, the incident solidified their resolve. They knew they were facing something larger than themselves, a criminal network with deep roots and far-reaching influence. It would have been easy to retreat, to let others fight this battle. But for Davin and Veronica, walking away wasn't an option. In the days following the attack, the couple met with law enforcement officials to assess their next steps. The authorities assured them that the investigation into the smuggling ring was progressing, but resources were limited and progress was slow. "Every piece of information you've provided has been invaluable," said Detective Jameson, the lead investigator. "But this isn't just a local operation. It's international. Taking it down will require more than what we currently have." Veronica's voice trembled as she spoke. "What more do you need? Evidence? Witnesses?" Jameson nodded. "Both. We need to know how far this goes and who's involved at every level. The people at the top are careful. They insulate themselves from the day-to-day operations. Without hard evidence tying them directly to the crimes, they'll walk away untouched." Davin leaned forward, his jaw set. "So what you're saying is, we're not done yet?" Jameson sighed. "Not if you're willing to keep helping. But I won't sugarcoat it, it's risky. The people you're dealing with don't take kindly to interference." Veronica looked at Davin, her eyes searching his face for reassurance. He met her gaze with unwavering determination. "We've come this far," he said. "We can't back down now." That evening, the two of them sat together in their apartment, laying out a plan. They decided to leverage the contacts they had made through their conservation work, reaching out to individuals and organizations that might have insights into the smuggling ring. "Every tip, every connection, it could be a piece of the puzzle," Davin said. Veronica nodded. "And we document everything. We'll build the case piece by piece if we have to." The decision was bold, but it came with a cost. They knew the threats against them would likely escalate, and they would have to tread carefully. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Davin and Veronica threw themselves into their work, balancing their public conservation efforts with their private investigation. Through their contacts, they learned of a former insider in the smuggling operation who might be willing to talk. The man, known only as Elias, had worked as a middleman for years before cutting ties with the organization. He was cautious and hesitant to meet, but after several days of careful negotiation, he agreed to speak with them under strict conditions. The meeting took place in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. Elias was a wiry man with sunken eyes and a nervous demeanor. He glanced around constantly, as if expecting someone to burst through the door at any moment. "You two are brave or foolish," he said, his voice low. "Do you have any idea who you're up against?" "We're starting to," Davin replied. "But we need to know more. Tell us everything you can." Elias hesitated, then leaned in closer. "They're not just smuggling animals. It's bigger than that. They're moving everything: ivory, rare plants, even live specimens for exotic collections. The money involved is staggering. But that's not the worst of it." Veronica frowned. "What do you mean?" "The ring is protected," Elias said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Politicians, law enforcement, even some conservation groups, they're all on the payroll. That's why they've been able to operate for so long. They have eyes and ears everywhere." Davin and Veronica exchanged a grim look. The scale of the operation was far more insidious than they had imagined. "Why did you leave?" Veronica asked. Elias's face darkened. "I couldn't stomach it anymore. The things I saw, the suffering. But leaving wasn't easy. They don't let people walk away. I had to fake my own death to get out." "Do you have proof?" Davin asked. Elias nodded. "I kept records, emails, transaction logs, photos. I couldn't bring myself to destroy them. Even after I left, part of me hoped someone would come along who could put them to use." "Then let us be those people," Veronica said earnestly. "Help us stop them." Elias hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. "I'll give you what I have, but you need to promise me something." "What's that?" Davin asked. "If they find out I'm alive, I'm as good as dead. You protect me, or the deal's off." "You have our word," Davin said firmly. The information Elias provided was a goldmine. The records detailed the inner workings of the smuggling ring, including payment logs, shipment routes, and communications with high-level operatives. The evidence was damning, implicating numerous individuals across multiple countries. Davin and Veronica turned the documents over to Detective Jameson, who was stunned by the scope of the operation. "This changes everything," Jameson said. "With this, we can start dismantling the network piece by piece." But even as the investigation gained momentum, the threats against Davin and Veronica intensified. One night, a brick was thrown through their apartment window, shattering glass across the floor. Attached to it was a note that read, "Last warning, walk away." Veronica clutched the note, her hands shaking. "How much longer can we keep this up?" she asked, her voice trembling. "As long as it takes," Davin said, wrapping his arms around her. "They're scared, Veronica. That means we're winning." The bold decision to continue their fight came with risks, but it also brought rewards. As the investigation unfolded, arrests were made, and key players in the smuggling ring were taken down. The operation was far from over, but progress was being made. For Davin and Veronica, the journey was a test of their courage, resilience, and love for each other. They knew the road ahead would be long and treacherous, but they were determined to see it through to the end. As the smuggling ring begins to unravel, Davin and Veronica find themselves facing new revelations that shake them to their core. In the next chapter, the stakes rise higher than ever as they uncover a hidden connection that changes everything. The attack on Davin and Veronica was a stark reminder of the dangerous forces they had provoked. Despite the fear that lingered in their hearts, the incident solidified their resolve. They knew they were facing something larger than themselves, a criminal network with deep roots and far-reaching influence. It would have been easy to retreat, to let others fight this battle. But for Davin and Veronica, walking away wasn't an option. In the days following the attack, the couple met with law enforcement officials to assess their next steps. The authorities assured them that the investigation into the smuggling ring was progressing, but resources were limited and progress was slow. "Every piece of information you've provided has been invaluable," said Detective Jameson, the lead investigator. "But this isn't just a local operation. It's international. Taking it down will require more than what we currently have." Veronica's voice trembled as she spoke. "What more do you need? Evidence, witnesses?" Jameson nodded. "Both. We need to know how far this goes and who's involved at every level. The people at the top are careful. They insulate themselves from the day-to-day operations. Without hard evidence tying them directly to the crimes, they'll walk away untouched." Davin leaned forward, his jaw set. "So what you're saying is, we're not done yet," Jameson sighed. "Not if you're willing to keep helping." But I won't sugarcoat it. It's risky. The people you're dealing with don't take kindly to interference. Veronica looked at Davin, her eyes searching his face for reassurance. He met her gaze with unwavering determination. "We've come this far," he said. "We can't back down now." That evening, the two of them sat together in their apartment, laying out a plan. They decided to leverage the contacts they had made through their conservation work, reaching out to individuals and organizations that might have insights into the smuggling ring. Every tip, every connection, it could be a piece of the puzzle, Davin said. Veronica nodded. "And we document everything. We'll build the case piece by piece if we have to." The decision was bold, but it came with a cost. They knew the threats against them would likely escalate, and they would have to tread carefully. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Davin and Veronica threw themselves into their work, balancing their public conservation efforts with their private investigation. Through their contacts, they learned of a former insider in the smuggling operation who might be willing to talk. The man, known only as Elias, had worked as a middleman for years before cutting ties with the organization. He was cautious and hesitant to meet, but after several days of careful negotiation, he agreed to speak with them under strict conditions. The meeting took place in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. Elias was a wiry man with sunken eyes and a nervous demeanor. He glanced around constantly, as if expecting someone to burst through the door at any moment. "You two are brave or foolish," he said, his voice low. "Do you have any idea who you're up against?" "We're starting to," Davin replied, "but we need to know more. Tell us everything you can." Elias hesitated, then leaned in closer. "They're not just smuggling animals, it's bigger than that. They're moving everything: ivory, rare plants, even live specimens for exotic collections. The money involved is staggering, but that's not the worst of it." Veronica frowned. "What do you mean?" "The ring is protected," Elias said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Politicians, law enforcement, even some conservation groups, they're all on the payroll. That's why they've been able to operate for so long. They have eyes and ears everywhere." Davin and Veronica exchanged a grim look. The scale of the operation was far more insidious than they had imagined. "Why did you leave?" Veronica asked. Elias's face darkened. "I couldn't stomach it anymore. The things I saw, the suffering. But leaving wasn't easy. They don't let people walk away. I had to fake my own death to get out." "Do you have proof?" Davin asked. Elias nodded. "I kept records, emails, transaction logs, photos. I couldn't bring myself to destroy them, even after I left. Part of me hoped someone would come along who could put them to use." "Then let us be those people," Veronica said earnestly. "Help us stop them." Elias hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. "I'll give you what I have, but you need to promise me something." "What's that?" Davin asked. "If they find out I'm alive, I'm as good as dead. You protect me or the deal's off." "You have our word," Davin said firmly. The information Elias provided was a goldmine. The records detailed the inner workings of the smuggling ring, including payment logs, shipment routes, and communications with high-level operatives. The evidence was damning, implicating numerous individuals across multiple countries. Davin and Veronica turned the documents over to Detective Jameson, who was stunned by the scope of the operation. "This changes everything," Jameson said. "With this, we can start dismantling the network piece by piece." But even as the investigation gained momentum, the threats against Davin and Veronica intensified. One night, a brick was thrown through their apartment window, shattering glass across the floor. Attached to it was a note that read, "Last warning, walk away." Veronica clutched the note, her hands shaking. "How much longer can we keep this up?" she asked, her voice trembling. "As long as it takes," Davin said, wrapping his arms around her. "They're scared, Veronica. That means we're winning." The bold decision to continue their fight came with risks, but it also brought rewards. As the investigation unfolded, arrests were made and key players in the smuggling ring were taken down. The operation was far from over, but progress was being made. For Davin and Veronica, the journey was a test of their courage, resilience, and love for each other. They knew the road ahead would be long and treacherous, but they were determined to see it through to the end. As the smuggling ring began to unravel, Davin and Veronica allowed themselves a brief moment of hope. Each arrest brought a sense of justice, and the authorities, bolstered by Elias's evidence, seemed increasingly confident in dismantling the network. But as progress was made on the surface, Davin couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Late one evening, as Veronica slept soundly beside him, Davin sat at his desk, poring over the records Elias had provided. He had studied the documents countless times, but a nagging intuition kept urging him to look again. There was a pattern, something subtle, hidden among the transactions and communications. He was certain of it. Hours passed as he meticulously cross-referenced dates, names, and locations. Then, in the quiet stillness of the night, he saw it. A series of payments had been routed through a seemingly unrelated third-party company, one that had no obvious ties to the smuggling ring. But the amounts were substantial, and the timing aligned perfectly with the ring's major shipments. Davin leaned closer, his breath catching as he recognized the company's name. It was a subsidiary of the global conglomerate that had long been chaired by Veronica's uncle Theodore. The revelation hit him like a thunderclap. Theodore was a man of immense influence, known for his philanthropic efforts and public support of environmental causes. If he was involved, it meant the smuggling ring's reach extended far deeper than anyone had imagined. The next morning, Davin shared his discovery with Veronica. She listened in stunned silence, her face pale as he laid out the connections. "My uncle?" she whispered. "That can't be right. He's dedicated his life to protecting the environment. He's donated millions to conservation efforts." "I know it's hard to believe," Davin said gently, "but the evidence is there. These payments, they're coming from one of his companies. It's too significant to be a coincidence." Veronica shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't accept this. He's always been a role model to me. If what you're saying is true, it would destroy everything I thought I knew about him." "I don't want it to be true either," Davin said. "But we need to know for sure. If he's involved, we have to act. And if he's not, then he deserves the chance to clear his name." Reluctantly, Veronica agreed. They decided to approach Theodore directly, hoping he might offer an explanation that would dispel their fears. They arranged to meet him at his estate, a sprawling property nestled in the countryside. Theodore greeted them warmly, his charisma and charm as disarming as ever. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" he asked, ushering them into his study. Veronica hesitated, her hands trembling as she clutched the folder containing the documents. "Uncle Theodore, we need to talk to you about something important. It's about your company." Theodore's smile faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "What about it?" Davin stepped in, his tone calm but firm. "We've been investigating the smuggling ring tied to Veronica's parents. In the process, we came across financial records that link one of your subsidiaries to the operation." For a moment, the room was silent. Theodore's expression hardened as he took the folder from Veronica and began flipping through the pages. "These are serious accusations," he said finally, his voice measured. "But I assure you, I have no knowledge of any such activities. My companies operate under strict ethical guidelines. If something improper is happening, it's without my approval." Veronica let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her. "I knew you couldn't be involved," she said. But Davin remained cautious. "With all due respect, sir, the scale of these transactions suggests more than a rogue employee. We need your help to get to the bottom of this." Theodore nodded. "Of course, I'll have my legal and compliance teams investigate immediately. In the meantime, I suggest you proceed carefully. Accusations like this can be damaging, even if they're unfounded." Despite Theodore's reassurances, Davin couldn't shake a lingering doubt. There was something in his tone, a subtle defensiveness that didn't sit right. Over the next few days, Theodore's team provided documentation to the authorities, claiming the payments were legitimate expenses tied to unrelated ventures. On the surface, the explanation seemed plausible, but Davin wasn't convinced. Driven by his suspicions, he decided to dig deeper. Working with Elias and Detective Jameson, he uncovered encrypted communications between the smuggling ring and an anonymous party. The messages were cautious, but certain phrases and references matched Theodore's business dealings. When the team decrypted a final critical message, the truth became undeniable. Theodore had not only been aware of the smuggling operation, but had played a central role in orchestrating its expansion. His public persona as an environmentalist had been a carefully crafted facade, shielding his illicit activities from scrutiny. Veronica was devastated when Davin shared the findings. "How could he do this?" she sobbed. "He's betrayed everything he claimed to stand for." "I'm so sorry," Davin said, holding her tightly. "I know how much he meant to you." "He's not the man I thought he was," she said bitterly, "and he doesn't deserve to get away with this." Determined to hold Theodore accountable, Davin and Veronica presented the evidence to Detective Jameson. The investigation gained new momentum, and Theodore's empire began to crumble under the weight of the revelations. The fallout was swift and far-reaching. Theodore's arrest sent shockwaves through the business and conservation communities, shattering the illusion of his integrity. For Veronica, the pain of losing yet another family member to corruption was almost unbearable. But she found strength in her work and her partnership with Davin. Their resolve to see the fight through to the end grew stronger than ever. They had uncovered the truth, no matter how painful, and now they were determined to use it to make a lasting difference. The revelation of Theodore's involvement in the smuggling ring left Davin and Veronica reeling. For Veronica, the betrayal was deeply personal. Theodore had been more than an uncle, he had been a mentor, a guiding force in her life. To discover that his environmental philanthropy had been a ruse to hide unspeakable crimes shattered her sense of trust. But amidst the pain, a fire ignited within her. Theodore's downfall was not the end of their fight. It was the beginning of a broader mission. She and Davin knew that the network they had exposed was just one piece of a global web of corruption, and they were determined to continue their work to ensure no one else would suffer as they had. The days following Theodore's arrest were a blur of activity. The authorities, armed with the evidence Davin and Veronica had uncovered, launched coordinated raids against the smuggling ring's remaining operations. Elias, the whistleblower, provided critical insights that helped law enforcement dismantle key logistical hubs, disrupting the network's supply chain. But the battle was far from over. The ring's leaders had gone underground, and there were still countless victims, both human and animal, whose suffering demanded justice. "We can't stop now," Veronica said one evening as she and Davin reviewed a report from the authorities. "This fight is bigger than Theodore or my parents. It's about holding every person involved accountable." Davin nodded. "We've come this far. Whatever it takes, we'll see it through." Their commitment led them to collaborate more closely with international organizations dedicated to combating wildlife trafficking. Through these partnerships, they learned about the systemic challenges that allowed smuggling networks to thrive: corruption, poverty, and lack of enforcement in vulnerable regions. Veronica threw herself into advocacy, using her voice to raise awareness about these issues. She spoke at conferences, wrote op-eds, and appeared in documentaries, sharing her story and urging others to join the fight. "This isn't just about saving animals," she told one audience. "It's about protecting ecosystems, supporting communities, and preserving the natural world for future generations. We all have a role to play." Davin, meanwhile, focused on leveraging his resources to support frontline efforts. He funded anti-poaching initiatives, provided equipment for rangers, and sponsored educational programs in areas impacted by trafficking. Together, he and Veronica became a powerful force for change, their partnership strengthened by their shared purpose. But their activism came at a cost. The threats against them intensified as the smuggling ring's remnants sought to silence them. One night, as they prepared for a fundraising gala, Davin received a chilling message on his phone, a video of their apartment, filmed from the street. "They're watching us," he said, showing the video to Veronica. Her face hardened with determination. "Let them watch, we're not backing down." Despite the danger, they refused to retreat. Instead, they worked with the authorities to tighten their security and continued to speak out, refusing to let fear dictate their actions. As the months passed, their efforts began to bear fruit. The smuggling ring's influence waned as its leaders were captured and its operations dismantled. Veronica's parents, Richard and Margaret, cooperated with investigators in exchange for reduced sentences, providing valuable information that helped bring down several high-ranking members of the network. For Veronica, seeing her parents take responsibility for their actions was bittersweet. Their betrayal had caused her immense pain, but their willingness to make amends offered a glimmer of redemption. "I'll never forgive what they did," she told Davin, "but I can respect that they're trying to do the right thing now." Davin nodded. "It's a step forward, and it shows that people can change even when they've made terrible choices." Their fight for justice culminated in a landmark trial that brought the smuggling ring's leaders to account. The courtroom was packed with journalists, activists, and survivors of the trafficking trade, all eager to see justice served. Veronica took the stand as a witness, her testimony a powerful indictment of the network's crimes. She spoke with clarity and conviction, her voice unwavering as she described the toll of the smuggling operation on its victims and the world. "When we turn a blind eye to these atrocities, we betray our own humanity," she said. "We must hold those responsible accountable and ensure this never happens again." The trial ended with significant convictions, sending a clear message that such crimes would no longer go unpunished. For Davin and Veronica, it was a moment of triumph, though tempered by the knowledge that the fight was far from over. As they left the courthouse, a journalist approached them with a question that gave them pause. "What's next for you two? Now that this chapter is over, what's your plan?" Davin glanced at Veronica, a small smile playing at his lips. "Our work isn't done," he said. "This isn't just about one network or one trial. It's about changing the system that allows these crimes to happen in the first place." Veronica nodded. "We've seen what's possible when people come together to fight for justice. That's what we want to build, a movement that inspires others to stand up for what's right, no matter how difficult it might be." Their answer sparked a wave of interest, with organizations and individuals reaching out to collaborate on new initiatives. For Davin and Veronica, the fight for justice was no longer just a mission, it was their life's calling. Their journey had taken them through darkness and pain, but it had also revealed the power of resilience, love, and courage. Together, they had faced seemingly insurmountable challenges and emerged stronger, ready to continue their fight for a better world. The dust began to settle after the landmark trial, but the scars left by the ordeal lingered in Davin and Veronica's lives. Though justice had been served, they both knew their journey had changed them irrevocably. For Veronica, the pain of betrayal, first by her parents, then by her uncle, was a wound that refused to heal easily. She carried the weight of their choices, often questioning how she could reconcile the people she loved with the heinous acts they had committed. Davin, ever supportive, understood her struggles deeply. He too had been shaped by the trials they endured together, and while his resolve remained unshaken, he worried about the toll it had taken on Veronica. Their love had survived the storm, but the question lingered: could it truly thrive again? One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their apartment, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Veronica turned to Davin with a look of quiet contemplation. "Do you think we'll ever feel normal again?" she asked softly. Davin reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "I don't think we'll ever go back to who we were before," he admitted. "But maybe that's a good thing. We've been through something that most people can't imagine, and we've come out stronger for it." Veronica nodded, though her eyes were clouded with doubt. "Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be able to forgive myself for not seeing the truth sooner, for not questioning things when I should have." "You can't hold yourself responsible for their actions," Davin said firmly. "You trusted them because they were your family. That's not a weakness, it's a testament to your love and loyalty. And look at what you've done since then. You've turned pain into purpose, Veronica. That's not something everyone can do." His words resonated with her, though they didn't erase her guilt. But as she sat there, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city, she realized that Davin had been her anchor through it all. He had believed in her when she doubted herself, stood by her when others had turned away, and fought alongside her even when the odds seemed impossible. Their love had been tested in ways neither of them could have anticipated, yet it had endured. And now, Veronica felt a stirring in her heart, a yearning not just to move forward, but to reclaim the joy and connection they had once shared. The following weeks marked a quiet shift in their relationship. Freed from the immediate pressures of the investigation and trial, they began to focus on rebuilding their lives together. They spent more time in each other's company, rediscovering the simple pleasures that had drawn them together in the first place. Davin surprised Veronica with a weekend trip to a remote cabin in the mountains, a place untouched by the chaos of the world they had left behind. The air was crisp and clean, the landscape a canvas of rolling hills and towering trees. For the first time in months, they allowed themselves to breathe deeply, to laugh without hesitation, to exist without the weight of their mission pressing on their shoulders. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Veronica looked at Davin with a smile that felt lighter than it had in months. "You know," she said, "I don't think I've ever told you how grateful I am for you, for everything you've done. I don't think I would have made it through this without you." Davin reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his eyes filled with warmth. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I've always known you were strong enough to face anything. I just wanted to make sure you never had to face it alone." The fire crackled softly, casting a golden glow over the room. Veronica's heart swelled with emotion, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt truly at peace. Their love, forged in the crucible of hardship, was now a source of strength that neither of them took for granted. They began to dream again, not just about the work they wanted to do, but about the life they wanted to build together. In the months that followed, they expanded their efforts to combat wildlife trafficking, launching a foundation dedicated to supporting grassroots organizations in vulnerable regions. The foundation, named after the mountain range where they had spent that transformative weekend, became a beacon of hope for countless individuals and communities. But their greatest act of love came in the form of a promise, a commitment to each other that transcended the struggles they had faced. On a crisp autumn evening, Davin brought Veronica back to the mountains where they had found solace. Underneath a canopy of stars, he knelt on one knee, his heart pounding with both nerves and joy. "Veronica," he began, his voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "These past months have been the hardest of my life, but they've also been the most meaningful. You've shown me what it means to fight for something bigger than ourselves, to love without limits, and to never give up. No matter how hard things get, I don't want to face another day without you by my side. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Veronica's face as she nodded, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. The stars above seemed to shine brighter as they embraced, their love reaffirmed in a way that no challenge could ever diminish. Their engagement marked the beginning of a new chapter, one defined not by the shadows of their past, but by the boundless possibilities of their future. Together, they continued to fight for justice, to build a world that reflected the values they held dear. But they also remembered to cherish the quiet moments, the laughter, and the unbreakable bond that had carried them through it all. In their journey, they had discovered a truth that would guide them for the rest of their lives. Love, when tested and redeemed, becomes an unshakable foundation, a force that can withstand any storm and light the way through even the darkest nights. Years had passed since the day Davin knelt under the stars and promised Veronica a future built on love and shared purpose. Their life together had been anything but ordinary, yet it was one neither of them would trade for anything in the world. The foundation they created flourished, becoming a global force for change. Through tireless dedication, they partnered with governments, conservationists, and communities to protect endangered species and dismantle trafficking networks. What began as a fight against one smuggling ring evolved into a movement that touched every corner of the globe. Veronica, once hesitant to speak publicly about her family's past, emerged as a powerful advocate for justice. Her story of betrayal and redemption resonated with people from all walks of life, inspiring countless others to confront the challenges in their own lives. She often spoke of the lessons she had learned, the importance of integrity, the value of resilience, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. Davin, always content to let Veronica take the spotlight, focused on the logistics and operations that kept their foundation running smoothly. He worked tirelessly behind the scenes, ensuring their initiatives were effective and sustainable. But in quieter moments, he reflected on how far they had come and the life they had built together. Their personal life was a sanctuary amidst the chaos of their work. They had chosen to remain in the modest apartment where their journey began, a space that symbolized simplicity and authenticity. Though their means could have afforded them luxury, they found joy in the small things: a shared cup of coffee in the morning, walks through the park, evenings spent reading or reminiscing about their adventures. Their family had grown as well. A rescue dog, aptly named Hope, became a beloved member of their household. Hope had been saved from one of the very trafficking rings they helped dismantle, and her presence served as a daily reminder of the lives they had changed. As the years turned into decades, Davin and Veronica began to consider the legacy they would leave behind. Their foundation was their greatest achievement, but they knew that its impact depended on the people who would carry it forward. They began mentoring a new generation of leaders, sharing their knowledge and instilling the values that had guided them. One such protege was a young woman named Elena, who had been inspired by Veronica's story to pursue a career in wildlife conservation. Under their guidance, Elena became a formidable advocate, blending compassion with determination. Watching her grow into her role filled Davin and Veronica with pride and hope for the future. "It's strange to think about," Veronica said one evening as she and Davin sat on their balcony, gazing at the city lights. "We started all of this because of one dinner, one decision to look deeper. And now it feels like we've created something so much bigger than ourselves." Davin smiled, taking her hand in his. "That's the beauty of it. The ripples of what we've done will keep spreading long after we're gone. That's what legacy is, planting seeds for trees we may never sit under." Their conversations often turned to reflection in those days. They spoke of the challenges they had faced, the sacrifices they had made, and the moments of triumph that made it all worthwhile. They found comfort in knowing that their love had been the cornerstone of everything they had accomplished. One morning, as they prepared for a ceremony honoring their lifetime of work, Davin paused in the hallway, looking at a framed photo of the two of them from years earlier. It was taken at one of their first fundraisers, their faces alight with the optimism of a couple just beginning to change the world. "Hard to believe that's us," he said, showing the photo to Veronica. She laughed softly, running her fingers over the frame. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" "More than I ever imagined," he replied. "And through it all, there's one thing I've never doubted." "What's that?" she asked, tilting her head. "You," he said simply. The ceremony was a grand affair, attended by leaders, activists, and supporters from around the world. Davin and Veronica were celebrated for their unwavering commitment to justice and their profound impact on the fight against wildlife trafficking. Yet, for all the accolades and applause, they remained humble, crediting their success to the countless individuals who had joined them along the way. In his speech, Davin addressed the audience with characteristic sincerity. "This isn't just our story," he said. "It's a testament to what people can achieve when they refuse to stand by in the face of injustice. Veronica and I have been fortunate to witness the power of collective action, and we're honored to have played a part in it. But this work doesn't end here. The legacy belongs to all of us, and it's up to each of you to carry it forward." As the evening drew to a close, Veronica looked out at the crowd, her heart full of gratitude. She thought of her parents, whose choices had set her on this path, her uncle, whose betrayal had tested her resolve, and Davin, whose love and partnership had been her constant anchor. Later, as they walked home under a canopy of stars, Veronica turned to Davin with a smile. "Do you ever think about what we've built, what it all means?" "All the time," he said. "And you know what I've realized?" "What?" "It means everything," he said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "Not because of the recognition or the accomplishments, but because we did it together. We turned pain into purpose, and we made something beautiful out of something broken. That's what life is all about." Their legacy, woven from threads of love, resilience, and determination, was one that would endure for generations. It wasn't just the foundation they left behind or the lives they had touched. It was the example they set, the reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope and courage could prevail. And as they walked hand in hand, their hearts full and their spirits unyielding, they knew they had fulfilled their promise to each other and to the world. They had left it better than they found it, and their love had been the guiding light every step of the way. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect on the power of love, resilience, and justice, don't leave without taking action. Hit the subscribe button and join our community of dreamers and doers who believe in making the world a better place. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that even in the darkest of times, hope can prevail. And here's your challenge. Drop a comment below and finish this sentence. Love and integrity guide my life, because your words might just inspire someone else today. Let's spread stories that matter and create a ripple effect of compassion and courage. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.